Hello everyone, welcome back and welcome to a new section where we're going to talk, as you can see, about the Ulster crisis between 1912 and 1914. And the Ulster crisis really is the beginning of the Irish Revolution now. As we'll see, the upheaval caused now by the introduction of the Third Home Rule Bill in 1912, and everything really that follows is going to stem from this. Now, so I say this is the start point now, your starting gun, as it were, for the Irish Revolution. And we're going to talk today about the Third Home Rule Bill, which is what lays at the root of all these problems. The background to this, and if you remember when we talked about constitutional nationalism, there's a number of problems for the Home Rule Party, one of which is a really major one, is the way it's hitched its star, as it were, to the Liberal Party. That has become, and it very much depends on how the Liberals are doing electorally as to whether Home Rule itself will come back on the political agenda. Now, as we said, the problem is going to be that the Tories dominate British politics for so long. And apart from Gladstone's very brief final ministry. But the issue is more than that. It's more than just when the Liberals come back to power, therefore they're going to get Home Rule. Because, of course, what's going to happen, I'll show you here actually, is when in 1906 we do have the Liberals coming back to power with this very, very crushing defeat of the Tories. As you can see, they absolutely, huge landslide victory now. They win in 1906. The trouble then becomes apparent, of course, that the Liberals don't need to rely on the 82 or whatever it is, Home Rule seats. They don't need those in Parliament. They don't need those MPs. They can now rule with this landslide without them. So it's not a simple case. You've got, I say, the Liberals coming in and suddenly you're going to get Home Rule. No, the Liberals don't need them. And the Liberals themselves are very keen to try and avoid the issue of Irish Home Rule. I mean, if they don't need to do it, then why do it? Because from the Liberal point of view, of course, when you think back, all that Home Rule had ever done is tear British politics apart. It had torn the Liberal Party apart in the 1880s, managed to get itself back together and hold on. But the party itself is very wary of getting involved in the sort of the quagmire of Ireland and Irish politics. And so it's not going to, if it doesn't need to, it's not going to particularly do it. This is going to be the Prime Minister, of course, from 1908, Herbert Asquith, who is, what is he now? He's Helena Bonham Carter's great-great-grandfather. There you go. There's a bit of trivia for you. There's apropos of nothing, but I just remembered that. Now, he's going to come in 1908. The reason he comes in is that the Prime Minister, who actually wins the election in 1906, is this man here, Henry Campbell Bannerman. Now, Henry Campbell Bannerman was actually, he was kind of keen on the idea, pardon me, of introducing Irish Home Rule. He thought, yeah, we should bring that forward. And you can see this, many people in the Liberal Party say, no, this is a mistake. But he dies quite soon after becoming Prime Minister. And I say, in 1908, Asquith takes over, and Asquith has no interest. He doesn't want to touch this with a barge pole, this issue of Ireland. And of course, he doesn't need to. And instead, of course, what the Liberals are going to concentrate on famously is the creation of the first ever welfare state in Britain, with all their welfare reforms. Massive programme for the first time, really, including unemployment benefits and old age pensions and national insurance and so on. That's the big issue. That's the big crusade, if you like, of this new Liberal government, not Ireland at all. And again, just show you, of course, we think about so Lloyd George, of course, is going to be the key figure in terms of this as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and will, along with Asquith, be one of the two prime ministers who were in charge during the whole of the Irish Revolution. So he'll be Chancellor, he'll take over as Prime Minister in 1916 during the First World War, and eventually will be Prime Minister right through until 1922. So I say these two Prime Ministers are absolutely key. And there he is, with Winston Churchill, the terrible twins, as they're called by the press. Because what they're doing with this huge programme, it's a momentous series of social legislation. This is a revolution of its own, really is, in British politics. This causes all kinds of convulsions. They are young liberal radicals, the pair of them. So I say that's where all the division is. That's where the arguments are. No one cares or really needs to care about Ireland. Thank God, if you're a liberal, you don't need to bother. And also, of course, with the Tories. The Tories are not going to concentrate on Ireland either because, at the minute, what's the kind of point, really? How many Irish MPs have they got on the Unionist side? 20 odd, maybe. That's not going to make any kind of difference. So the Irish issue can be safely pushed to the background. Now, the thing is, of course, what's going to happen? I'm going to bring the Irish issue straight back front and centre, is because of the demands that Lloyd George is making for huge rises in terms of expenditure and taxation, therefore, in 1909, when he puts forward his what's called the People's Budget now, which calls, I say, a huge overhaul of welfare, of taxation and so on, say it is a revolution. But the Conservative-dominated House of Lords begins to act in a deliberately partisan way. Now, the Lords itself, at this time, has the power to veto legislation coming from the Commons. They have the power to actually basically stop legislation, but it rarely does this. It does have this power, though. What it usually will do, the Lords, is propose a series of amendments which then would go back to the lower house, back to the Commons, and there'd be a bit of back and forth and a bit of horse trading, and eventually they'd come up with some kind of solution after addressing the concerns of the House of Lords. But I'd say the radicalism of the New Liberals really does upset now the equilibrium, or I suppose, of British politics and the British Constitution. And I say the Lords respond now with a series of delaying actions, a series of amendments. And I'll give you a quote here. This is, I say, just to give you an idea of, say, the radicalism of what the Liberals are doing. This is Lloyd George. This is when people could really make political speeches, not often like today. But you can see this is a war budget. It is for raising money to wage implacable warfare against poverty and squalidness. I cannot help hoping and believing that before this generation has passed away, we shall advance a great step towards that good time when poverty and the wretchedness and human degradation which always follows in its camp will be as remote to the people of this country as the wolves which once infested its forests. Isn't it? There we go. So that's him, 1909, going to sell this People's Budget now. And I'd say that the thing about this, and this is the strange thing, what he's going to do in 1909, so he's going to pass this through the Commons now because they've got this massive majority, send it to the Lords. The Lords then reject the Liberal budget. Now that's unprecedented. It never happens. I mean, it especially never happens with finance bills. That's something you absolutely don't do. So what happens is now in January 1910, Asquith decides they're going to call a general election on this issue. Now, they're going to call it, let's put it to the people now. And of course, what the Liberals expect is to register a very, very clear victory from the people. Popular people support, the People's Budget, all this stuff. Surely the ordinary people are going to vote for them in even bigger numbers than they had in 1906. But the thing is, what happens is the result is actually quite inconclusive. The Liberals win 274 seats. The Tories win only 2 less, 272. So this becomes a crisis, a constitutional crisis. And as you can see in 1910 now, what it means, it's at this point that the Irish question is going to move again to centre stage, because it means that Redmond himself now with his 82 MPs is essentially the kingmaker. So he's going to support this government now, and if it gives him home rule, he holds the balance of power. Now, and negotiations drag on now for almost a year, until finally they strike a deal with the Liberals now for the introduction of a third home rule bill. And that's the price that's going to be paid for continued Irish support now in all these various pieces of welfare legislation and so on. I mean, Asquith himself, as I say, is not keen on the Irish issue. And what he actually does, Asquith, is calls another election in December of 1910, the same year. And I'll show you the results here. So you see, he wants to have to keep the Irish Party out of this completely, and maybe another election he can win a majority now safely. But it doesn't. It happens exactly the same result. It's incredible. So what he'll do now, Asquith realising he's stuck, that he has no choice now but to bring the Irish issue back in, is he brings forward now a Parliament bill. And let me just show you some of these. I thought these quite fun. So these are, as you can see, these are Tory posters. You go, attacking the people's budget and so on, and Lloyd George. I do love this very patronising view the Tories obviously have of the working class. You know, the working class love beer and baccy, and it's a very patronising kind of view. But that's where they're kind of selling it anyway. That's what it's going to mean. The argument is whether it's true or not. It's politics, isn't it? But they bring forward now, I say, this Parliament bill, and this is to address now and lead to profound changes in terms of the British Constitution. What they'll do is, firstly, they'll reduce the maximum length of the Parliament from 7 years to 5 years, and also create now salaried MPs. Now, Parnell had actually introduced salaried MPs back in the day. First people actually pay MPs now, but now everyone's going to have salaries paid for, as it were, by the state. The most notable thing the Parliament Act, though, will do is attack the veto power of the House of Lords. Now, what they'll do is now the upper house can now only delay the passing of legislation. It can't veto it completely. And what it effect means that any bill that is passed through the Commons in identical form now 3 times becomes law, no matter what the Lords voted to do. So you have a piece of legislation, you send it off to the Lords, they say no, you send it back. You don't change that bill in the Commons, you send it back like a game of ping pong. If you do that 3 times, then it's going to become law no matter what the Lords have said. That's the new constitutional arrangement now. I'll just show you some of this. Here we go. Here's some Liberal posters in 1910. And you can see what they're going for, a very class based campaign. So the rich, the Lords, there we go. It's amazing how this doesn't really appeal to the mass of the people. Obviously, the Tory campaign was quite effective as well. So the House of Lords now is basically forced to accept this suspensive veto, because the point would be, of course, if they're introducing this Parliament bill, what's to stop the Lords just vetoing that anyway? Because they still have the power to do that. Well, what Asquith does is, quite cleverly, he threatens now to flood the Lords with new Liberal peers. So he'll say, I'll make 300 Liberal peers now, 300 Liberal Lords now, and they'll pass it through. And they don't. That's a bigger fear to the Tory establishment, as it were, than this Parliament Act. So that's going to be passed. It's a huge moment in British political history, of course, now, because the power of the upper house now is diminished and will continue to diminish over the decades to come. So now it means, of course, the Liberals have to move on now and fulfil the promise that they'd made to Redmond and the Home Rule Party. And we might as well let's see some Home Rule propaganda as well now, with the introduction finally of a new Home Rule bill for Ireland. So this is the price they had to pay to be able to carry through, I say, this constitutional change, and then their welfare reforms and all their kind of radical ideas. Now, it's introduced, this Home Rule Bill, in April 1912. Now, what this means, and think about this, with the new Parliament Act, it means that we know it's going to be rejected by the Lords, inevitably, because they're all Tories. They're all going to reject it. That's going to happen. And so it will go back and forth with the ping pong thing. It will go back and forth. But it means, introduced in April 1912, whatever happens, this bill will become law in the summer of 1914. So that's, you see, that's the point. That's go back and forth. That's how long it takes, those, whatever it is, 2 years, where you send it through and then they deliberate and then they send it back. It takes over 2 years in the parliamentary process to do that. But there's no stopping it now. So the clock is ticking now for Home Rule. It's going to happen. At last, they're finally going to be able to achieve it, no matter what the Tories do. Now, for all the trouble the third Home Rule Bill is going to cause, and I'll put the Home Rule Bill up here so you get an idea of exactly what it is. It's hardly a revolutionary piece of legislation, the third Home Rule Bill. It's virtually identical, really, to its two 19th century predecessors. It offers a very moderate form of devolution. I say an Irish Parliament now, with a lot of areas devolved and reserved and so on for the Westminster Parliament. So foreign policy, military affairs, trade, constitutional matters, all the big stuff still remains in the hands of the Westminster government. Alongside this, there is a promise made in the third Home Rule, which I suppose makes it different from its predecessors, in that the British will subsidise now the new Irish administration, because it will need to pay for the whole plethora of new social welfare reform. So that wasn't a problem in the past. But remember, the Liberals have got all these huge amounts of social welfare, paying people old age pensions and unemployment benefit and so on. And basically what the Liberals are saying, because Ireland actually doesn't create enough taxation to actually support programmes like this. It just doesn't have the money if you left it alone. So they're going to subsidise their taxes to be able to do this. So, and you can see here, there's a reference here now about money and so on, and Redmond being given piles of cash. There you go. This is obviously a Tory poster attacking it. But so I say that's going to be set now. That's the plan, this very moderate form of devolution, which is really what the Home Rule Party wants. The Home Rule Party, as we said, are not separatists. They're not nationalists in that sense, or in a very broad sense, you could call them nationalists. They see the benefits of being in the British Empire. They just want, I say, control of their own kind of internal affairs. Now, the issue is going to be, and this is, as we'll see, where the problem is going to arise. And here's a wonderful engraving here. You can see this. And just really hints at the point I'm going to make, is that no provision, no part of the bill makes any provision for the special treatment of Ulster. That isn't. Now, the Ulster had played a key role in opposition, of course, to the previous two Home Rule bills. Ulster was, as we've mentioned, beginning to dominate the agenda of Irish Unionism. We mentioned the Ulster Unionist Council and the growing power of Belfast, and that's where you'd find organised political, vibrant unionism, if you like. But no one seems to consider that maybe this could be an issue of Ulster. And of course, that's exactly what's going to happen. The opposition, Irish Unionist opposition now, to the third Home Rule Bill, the reactions to it are going to be incredibly vociferous from Irish Unionists, particularly in Ulster, from the Tories as well. They're going to turn confrontational, remarkable. So what this opens up now is a huge campaign against the threat of Home Rule. And I suppose it hints, of course, at the point that the old days, the Lords would always protect you. The Lords would always scupper any attempt at Home Rule. You knew that was safe. That safeguard's gone now. As we said, the clock is ticking. The summer of 1914, that's when Home Rule is coming through, no matter what you do. Time is ticking. So you need now, as it were, to mobilise Irish Unionism and Irish Unionist sympathy. And what we'll do next time is we'll talk about that, the reactions, the remarkably strong reactions now which will lead almost, some would argue, to civil war in Ireland by the time we get to 1914 when the pressure's on. And we'll talk about that next time. Okay, folks, so see you soon.